Correct. So the tree on the seal is a cedar. Yes. And what does it mean? I have no idea. Their sycamores are fallen. They vote to replace them, but instead of replacing them with other sycamores, they replace them with the cedars. Why do you think they would do that? It would have to be for the same reason. They didn't replace the fallen bricks with other bricks, but with the quarried stone. The goal wasn't restoration, but defiance. So I guess that the cedar was stronger than the sycamore, or different from the sycamore, as quarried stones were from clay bricks. You're right. The sycamore was the common tree. It was never seen as something of great value. Its grain was coarse, nutty, spongy, and not particularly strong. And though its wood could be used in construction, it was neither the most ideal nor most durable material to build with. So it was kind of the clay brick of trees. Oh. Exactly. And as the clay bricks were replaced by massive stones, the fallen sycamore would be replaced by the cedar. So the cedar was stronger than the sycamore, much stronger and much more higher valued. The sycamore grew in the lowlands. The cedar grew on the mountain heights. The sycamore was common. The cedar was exotic. Unlike the twisting sycamore, the cedar was straight, majestic, and towering. Its wood was smooth, durable, and perfectly suited for construction. The sycamore could reach a height of about 50 feet, but the cedar could grow to well over 100. That was the point. They would plant cedars in place of the fallen sycamores. And unlike the sycamore, the cedar would stand strong against any future attack, or so they hope. One commentary puts it this way: instead of hearkening, heeding, and repenting, the nation determines to act in spirit of defiance. It will exchange its feeble sycamores that are cut down for strong cedars which the wildest gales will spare. The wildest gale would be what? He asked. The nation's coming day of judgment. I replied, yes, and on that day nothing would be spared. Not the trees, not the stones, not the nation. And the kingdom would fall as quickly and violently as the cedar crashing down to the earth. So it's the same thing they did with the quarried stone, the same act in the different form. They laid the quarried stone in the place of fallen bricks. Now they plant the cedar in the place of the sycamore. It's the act of kalaf, she said. He said, kalaf is the Hebrew word used in the verse. It means to exchange, to replace, to plant one thing in the place of another. And what about the word cedar? I asked. Cedar is English. What's the original word used in the prophecy? What was the tree called in Hebrew? Erez. It was called Erez. The sycamores have fallen, but we will plant Erez trees in their place. So Erez means cedar? I asked. Yes and no, he replied. Cedar is the word most often used to translate Erez, as in the cedars of Lebanon, but Erez means much more than English cedar. Come, with that, he left the path and led me over to a tree. How would you describe it, Nuriel? It's an evergreen. And what else? It has cones, and its leaves are needle-like. It's a coniferous tree, a conifer, the classic botanical work known as the Hierobotanicon defines the Hebrew Eretz as a conifer or coniferous tree. The word Eretz also appears in several different ancient texts where it refers to an evergreen conifer. So an Eretz tree is a coniferous evergreen. Yes, he replied, but Not every coniferous evergreen is necessarily an hereditary. So what exactly is it? I asked. Most especially, it's a particular kind of cone-bearing evergreen. One commentator more narrowly pinpoints it. The Hebrew errors rendered cedar in all English versions is most likely a generic word for the pine family. And that means that what exactly? The hereditary would fall under the botanical classification of Pinacea. Pinacea and what? I asked. Does the Pinacea refer to especially the cedar, the spruce, the pine, and the fir? So the most accurate identification of a Hebrew word areas would be Pinacea tree. Yes, the most botanically precise translation of the word would be, but we will plant the Pinacea trees in their place. And the Pinacea includes the cedar, but more than the cedar, correct. So they plant the stronger tree in place of the weaker as they vow a stronger nation to replace a weaker one. The hereditary tree becomes another symbol of a nation and its defiance, a living symbol of their confidence in their national resurgence, their tree of hope. A tree of hope, but not a good hope. No, he replied, a prideful, self-centered, and godless hope. What they saw as a tree of hope was in reality harbinger of judgment. He asked me for the seal. So, of course, I gave it to him, and lifting it up in his right hand as he had done with the others, he began to reveal its mystery. The seventh harbinger, the warning of the fallen sycamore, goes unheeded. Its uprooted remains are removed. Another tree is brought to the place of its fall, a Hebrew eras, a conifer, an evergreen, the biblical cedar. The pinacea tree, the hereditary, is planted in the same spot where the fallen sycamore had once stood. The planting is vested with the symbolic meaning. The second tree becomes the symbol of national resurgence, confidence, and hope. But like the carried stone, in reality it embodies the nation's defiance. It will stand as a witness of a nation's force of and a living omen of its rejection of running a given. The seventh harbinger, the hereditary. So the sign is the appearance of an hereditary. Yes, it's planting. Yes, it's planting. And in the place of the swollen sycamore, if that happens, the seventh harbinger is manifested. Manifested. Yes. At the point we resume our walking, and has the seventh harbinger manifested? I asked. It has. How? It began with the removing of the sycamore of ground zero. Yes, it was taken from the place of its fall and put on public display as a symbol of the calamity. Even its root system would be carefully removed and transferred to another site. But for the ancient mystery to play out, I said, another tree would have to be brought to the same plot of land and planted in the same place where the sycamore had stood. In late November 2003, 2 years after the falling of the sycamore, a strange sight appeared at the corner of Ground Zero. In the sky, a tree. It was being transported by crane over a country yard of soil and grass. Those in charge of the operation carefully guarded it down to the appointed spot. The new tree was set into position to stand on the same spot where once had stood the sycamore of ground zero. What was it? What kind of tree? The most natural thing to have done would have been to replace the one sycamore with another. But the prophecy required that the fallen sycamore be replaced with a tree of an entirely different nature. So the tree that replaced the sycamore of ground zero was likewise not a sycamore. According to the prophecy, the sycamore must be replaced by the biblical arid. So it must be replaced by the conifer tree. and the tree that replaced the sycamore of ground zero. The tree that replaced the sycamore was a conifer tree. An evergreen, yes, with needle-like leaves and cones. They replaced the fallen sycamore with the arid tree, the sign of a nation's force open defiance before God. It's like something out of a movie. It's surreal, except that it's real. Who was behind the decision to do that? I asked. No one, he answered. No one in the sense of any one person making it all happen or trying to fulfill the prophecy. No one had any idea what they were doing? No one. Then where did it come from? The tree was a gift donated from an outside party, just as was the gazing stone that replaced the fallen bricks. But you narrowed the word areas down more specifically to one particular kind of conifer, the pinaceae tree. And the tree that was lowered into the ground, its Latin name was Piscia albis, and the tree that replaced the sycamore was a Panaceae tree. The Pinaceae tree, the same tree of the ancient prophecy, the same tree that had to replace the fallen sycamore, unbelievable. And the sister tree to the cedar of Lebanon, and it all took place at the corner of ground zero. Yes. And the replacing of the bricks with the gazing stone happened at ground zero. Yes. So both parts of the ancient prophecy were fulfilled in the same place at ground zero. And not only in the same place, he said, but in the same way. What do you mean? They didn't just place the gazing stone on ground zero. They made it into a public event, a public gathering completely centered around the harbinger. So it was with the replacing of the sycamore by the arid tree. The act became a public event, a gathering completely centered on the harbinger. And who led the event? A local spiritual leader. So the planting of the arid tree was made into a ceremony. A ceremony centered on the act of replacement, as the laying down of the gazing stone was an act of replacement. Each event centered on one of the harbingers neither had anything to do with repentance. Instead, it exerted the human spirit and its defiance of calamity. It was another echo of the ancient vow 2,500 years earlier. The people of Israel responded to their calamity by planting the arid trees as a sign of their defiant, self-confident hope. Now, in the aftermath of 9/11 and against the backdrop of Ground Zero, the assembled New Yorkers repeated the ancient acts with their new arid tree. They too transformed it into a sign. During that ceremony, the officiant bestowed on the tree a name. He proclaimed, "This ground zero tree of hope will be a sign of the indomitable nature of human hope." "A tree of hope," said the prophet, "and a sign, yes, of the indomitable nature." Indomitable meaning unconquerable. The spirit of the vow. And in the vow, what word was used for this act? You just told me, kalaf, which means to exchange, to replace, to plant something in the place of another. So that's exactly what has to be fulfilled. It's not just that one tree is fallen and a new one planted, but the new tree has to be planted in the same place. The arid tree must be planted in the same place where the fallen sycamore had once stood. Now listen to the words they proclaimed that day as they gathered around the arid tree. The tree of hope is planted in the very spot where the 60-year-old sycamore stood the morning of September 11, 2001. And nobody realized that what they were doing was matching with the prophecy. I asked. There was no one putting it all together. No one, he answered. It's an exact, precise fulfillment of the ancient vow. It's exact, and as if there highlighting it so you can't miss it. That's nature of the harbingers, Nuria. They have to be made to manifest. They couldn't have matched it any more precisely than if they had recited Isaiah 9:10 word for word, and nobody was trying to make it happen. They all just happened to do it. Think about it, Nuria. Who could have put it all together? The tower fell because of the terrorist. It happened to fall exactly as if it did in order to strike down that one particular tree. The tree just happened to be a sycamore.